If you've just discovered our channel, welcome. We'd be thrilled to have you become part of our growing community. Simply subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. We put a great deal of time and care into every story we create, and we're confident you'll enjoy what's coming next. Ever since I was a child, I trusted my mother's advice without question. She was always reminding me to eat well, take my vitamins, and look after myself. After my father vanished from our lives, it was just the two of us. She became my entire world, and we learned to depend on one another. One afternoon, while helping her sort the laundry, I noticed something I had never really paid attention to before. Her clothes were completely different from mine. My wardrobe consisted mostly of blue jeans, t-shirts, and simple everyday outfits, while hers was filled with elegant garments made from soft fabrics. I found myself staring at them much longer than I intended. The materials looked delicate, smooth, and incredibly comfortable. They seemed almost luxurious compared to anything I owned. I couldn't explain why I felt so fascinated by them, but the curiosity continued to grow. Later that evening, while I was taking a bath, I noticed a pair of my mother's stockings hanging over the shower rod to dry. Earlier, I had asked her why one of them had what she called a run in it. She had smiled and explained that stockings were very delicate and that little snags happened all the time. I remember comparing them to my socks, wondering why mine never developed those strange lines. Her explanation stayed in my mind. A few days later, curiosity finally got the better of me. When I came home from school one afternoon, I knew my mother wouldn't be back from work for several hours. The house was completely quiet, giving me an opportunity one had been thinking about for weeks. I slowly walked into her bedroom and carefully opened the top drawer of her dresser. Inside, everything was perfectly organized. Every item had its own place, neatly folded and arranged with care. There were silky garments unlike anything I had ever touched before. Some felt incredibly smooth, while others had a stretchy, elastic texture that was completely unfamiliar to me. A faint fragrance drifted from the drawer, a mixture of perfume, fabric softener, and something uniquely hers. The scent alone made the room feel different. I carefully picked up one of the stretchy garments that extended down into two legs. Unsure of what I was doing, I decided to try putting it on. It wasn't easy. I struggled to figure out how it fit, adjusting it several times before finally managing to pull it into place. Once I succeeded, I stood there quietly, unsure how to describe what I was feeling. It was awkward, unfamiliar, and strangely exciting all at once. The fit felt tight around my hips and thighs, making movement a little uncomfortable, yet I couldn't ignore the overwhelming sense of curiosity that had led me there. As I looked around the room, my attention shifted to the bottles sitting neatly on top of her dresser. One of them was her perfume. Without thinking too much about it, I picked it up and gently pressed the nozzle. The fragrance instantly filled the room. Startled, I accidentally sprayed more than I intended, and some of it landed on my clothes and skin. The scent surrounded me almost immediately. Realizing my mistake, I carefully replaced the cap and set the bottle back exactly where I had found it, hoping she wouldn't notice. I have no idea how long I stood there, completely absorbed in the strange mixture of emotions running through my mind. Then everything changed. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. My heart nearly stopped. My mother had come home much earlier than expected. Frozen in panic, I tried desperately to undo what I had done. My hands shook as I struggled to remove the garment, but in my haste it became tangled around my ankles. I lost my balance and fell onto the bedroom floor. In a final attempt to hide, I crawled toward the bed, hoping she wouldn't see me. It was already too late. She walked into the room. The air still carried the unmistakable scent of a perfume, and I was lying on the floor with her clothing wrapped around my legs. I couldn't bring myself to look directly at her. Embarrassment flooded over me, and fear took hold as I wondered what she must have been thinking. Neither of us spoke. That evening passed in complete silence. We sat together eating macaroni and cheese without exchanging a single meaningful word. I was overwhelmed by confusion, shame, and a strange excitement that I couldn't understand. The experience had awakened feelings I had never known existed. Eventually, I went to bed, unable to stop replaying the entire afternoon in my mind. For nearly a year afterward, nothing more was said about what had happened. The discomfort became impossible to ignore, so she gently asked me to take off my shirt. As I looked down at my chest, I realized the aching sensation seemed to be centered there. When I carefully touched the area, I noticed firm, unfamiliar lumps beneath the skin. Panic immediately set in, but she calmly smiled and assured me there was nothing to fear. According to her, my body was simply going through a natural stage of development, and everything would eventually make sense. Because of an ongoing medical condition, I had been excused from participating in physical education throughout middle school. While my classmates spent their afternoons playing sports and competing with one another, I devoted my time to reading, drawing, and focusing on my schoolwork. Creativity became my escape, and I poured my energy into academics instead of athletics. One thing constantly puzzled me, however. The other boys seemed endlessly fascinated by girls, talking about them whenever they had the chance. I couldn't relate to those conversations at all. Although I had several male acquaintances and got along with them reasonably well, I always felt far more comfortable around girls. Their company felt natural, their conversations easier, and somehow I understood them in ways that surprised even me. Despite having friends, I often carried an overwhelming feeling that I simply didn't belong anywhere. Every day I faithfully continued taking the vitamins my mother gave me. At the same time, society itself seemed to be changing. Long hairstyles for boys had become fashionable, making it easier for me to blend in without attracting attention. Yet while trends changed around me, even greater changes were quietly unfolding within my own body. Several of the boys at school had begun growing facial hair, proudly showing off the first signs of adulthood. Some even had visible mustaches. I waited for similar changes, assuming they would eventually happen to me as well. But week after week, nothing appeared. Instead, I noticed something entirely different. Whenever I looked into the mirror, I saw a reflection that felt increasingly unfamiliar. My jeans no longer fit correctly. The waistband hung loosely despite fitting snugly around my hips and thighs, making my lower body appear much curvier than before. My mother encouraged me to keep my hair long, insisting it suited my appearance much better than a shorter haircut. One evening I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. It suddenly became impossible to ignore what I was seeing. Not only was there no trace of chest hair, but my chest itself had begun developing noticeable curves. At first I convinced myself it was my imagination. Surely I was seeing things that weren't really there. Months passed, and denial was no longer possible. By the end of the following 6 months, my chest had developed so dramatically that I honestly believed my breasts were larger than those of many girls attending my high school. At the same time, confusing new emotions began surfacing. I found myself noticing certain boys in ways I had never experienced before. Those feelings frightened me because I couldn't understand where they had come from or why they felt so genuine. Ironically, I also became even closer to several girls at school. Many of them confided in me, saying they felt comfortable sharing personal thoughts because I listened differently than other boys did. They often remarked that I understood their emotions better than most guys ever could. Hearing those words made me feel accepted, yet they also deepened my confusion about my own identity. Determined to hide the physical changes, I started wearing oversized shirts and loose hoodies that concealed my growing chest. I kept my long hair hanging forward to distract attention from my face and body. Still, no matter how carefully I dressed, I couldn't completely disguise the changes. My waist remained narrow while my chest continued becoming fuller, giving my body proportions that resembled those of a young woman far more than those of a teenage boy. People I had never met increasingly addressed me as Miss or Young Lady. Initially those mistakes embarrassed me, but to my surprise, I slowly realized they didn't bother me nearly as much as I expected. In fact, there were moments when hearing those words brought an unexpected sense of comfort I couldn't explain. Despite my growing uncertainty, I never stopped taking the vitamins my mother insisted were important. Eventually, though, I reached a point where I knew I could no longer keep my fears to myself. There was only one person I trusted enough to speak honestly with: my mother. By then, the transformation had become impossible to overlook. My waist had slimmed considerably, my overall figure had become noticeably softer, and my chest had grown even larger. Looking in the mirror, I realized my body resembled the figure many women wished they had. At the same time, my attraction toward boys continued becoming stronger, filling me with equal parts excitement and fear. Life at school became increasingly difficult. The other boys often teased me because my voice sounded different from theirs. Rather than fighting back, I withdrew into myself, avoiding unnecessary conversations and keeping my distance whenever possible. Eventually I gathered enough courage to tell my mother everything. I explained my confusion, my fears, my changing body, and the emotions I no longer knew how to understand. As always, she reminded me to continue taking my vitamins. Then she quietly told me there was something important she had wanted to reveal for many years. We sat together, and after taking a long breath, she finally began speaking. Her voice trembled as she explained that after her painful divorce from my father, she had developed deep resentment toward men. Tears filled her eyes as she confessed that having a daughter had always been her greatest dream. She admitted she couldn't bear the thought of raising a son and had decided, very early in my childhood, that she would instead raise me as the daughter she had always wanted. Her confession stunned me. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then we both broke down crying. Years of confusion, unanswered questions, and hidden emotions poured out all at once. It was an emotional conversation unlike anything we had ever shared before. After we had calmed down, she smiled gently and said she had another surprise waiting for me. She led me back to my bedroom, where a beautiful new dresser had appeared. She encouraged me to open each drawer one by one. Inside were neatly folded pajamas made from incredibly soft fabric, elegant nightgowns, and comfortable sleepwear in colors I had never imagined owning. Another drawer contained carefully arranged hair accessories, decorative barrette, colorful headbands, earrings, rings, and other small pieces of jewelry that had clearly been chosen with great care. I stood there speechless. A mixture of relief, excitement, uncertainty, and disbelief swept over me. I wanted to express everything I was feeling, yet I couldn't find the right words. For the first time in years, however, I sensed that perhaps I no longer needed to hide every part of myself. That evening we continued talking for hours. It became the most open and honest conversation we had ever shared. I told her every fear I had buried, every question that had haunted me, and every emotion I had been too afraid to admit aloud. She listened without interrupting, allowing me to finally say everything I had been carrying alone. The following morning, after taking my usual vitamins, I joined my mother once again. She smiled warmly before telling me she had one final piece of news. For years she had quietly been setting money aside, carefully saving for a future she believed would eventually become important. According to her, that future had finally arrived, and she was now ready to reveal the plans she had been preparing all along. My mother explained that she had spent years building a relationship with an experienced physician, preparing for a future she believed might one day become reality. After our conversation ended, I spent the next 2 hours completely overwhelmed. I cried more than I ever had before, repeatedly walking to the mirror, staring at my reflection, and trying to understand the person looking back at me. Countless thoughts raced through my mind. One option was to continue living as the boy I had been born as, pretending nothing had changed. Yet every glance into the mirror challenged that decision. The reflection staring back at me no longer matched the identity I had carried throughout my childhood. My appearance had changed so dramatically that denying it felt impossible. Still, one question continued to haunt me. If biology had determined everything from the beginning, how could my mother have believed she could somehow raise me as the daughter she had always wanted? I desperately searched for answers that would make sense of everything I had experienced. Later that evening, my mother and I sat down once more for another long and emotional conversation. This time I spoke openly about every lingering doubt and every unanswered question that still weighed heavily on my mind. We discussed the future honestly, without avoiding the difficult topics. By the time our conversation ended, I had reached a decision. Rather than continuing to live in constant uncertainty, I wanted to move forward in a way that felt true to the person I believed myself to be. Over the following weeks, numerous appointments were arranged, paperwork was completed, and detailed discussions were held with medical professionals. Every step was carefully planned, giving me opportunities to reconsider if I wished. Although I was frightened by the magnitude of the decision, I also felt an increasing sense of peace. Eventually the scheduled day arrived. Walking into the medical facility filled me with anxiety unlike anything I had ever experienced. My emotions shifted constantly between fear, anticipation, excitement, and uncertainty. After being admitted, I was prepared for the procedure. The medical staff spoke reassuringly, answered my remaining questions, and did everything possible to help me remain calm. Soon afterward, the anesthesia began taking effect, and I slowly drifted into unconsciousness. When I finally opened my eyes again, everything was over. A nurse noticed I was awake and smiled reassuringly before explaining that the procedure had been completed successfully. Recovery would require patience, but everything had gone according to plan. Hearing those words filled me with relief. I realized that a significant chapter of my life had come to an end, and another had just begun. My mother stayed beside me throughout my recovery. Her happiness was unmistakable. She often told me that, in her eyes, the daughter she had dreamed of for so many years was finally standing beside her. Seeing the joy on her face made the difficult recovery period feel a little easier. As my strength gradually returned, we began enjoying simple activities together. One of our favorite outings became shopping trips. We spent hours browsing clothing stores, flipping through fashion catalogs, comparing different outfits, shoes, and accessories, and imagining new styles I might enjoy wearing. Those moments allowed us to create memories that neither of us had ever expected to experience together. My reasoning felt surprisingly simple. More than half of the world's population was female, and throughout my life I had never truly felt comfortable presenting myself as a boy. I found genuine enjoyment in expressing myself through clothing, fragrances, hairstyles, jewelry, and other forms of personal style. Rather than feeling like obligations, those activities became creative outlets that allowed me to express who I believed I was. Looking back, I realized those interests had always been present. They had simply remained hidden beneath years of uncertainty and confusion. As time passed, I became increasingly comfortable with my daily routine. I enjoyed selecting outfits each morning, experimenting with hairstyles, wearing perfume, and choosing accessories that reflected my personality. These ordinary moments brought a sense of confidence that had been missing for much of my life. Eventually, I also hoped to build a meaningful romantic relationship. More than anything else, I wanted to find someone who was patient, compassionate, respectful, and genuinely caring. My greatest desire was never centered on appearances but on experiencing love, trust, affection, and emotional closeness with someone who accepted me completely for who I was. After my mother's passing, I found myself reflecting on many different possibilities for my future. I considered various kinds of relationships and remained open to discovering what would ultimately make me happiest. Regardless of where life might lead, I realized that what mattered most to me was sharing mutual love, kindness, and genuine companionship with another person. As I continued adapting to everyday life, I also became accustomed to practical differences that came with my new routine. Some situations required adjustments, and certain tasks that had once been effortless now demanded a little more planning. Even so, those inconveniences gradually became ordinary parts of daily life. One of the greatest sources of comfort came from simple acts of self-care. Taking time to care for my appearance, applying lotion after a shower, brushing my hair, choosing comfortable clothing, or simply relaxing at the end of a long day all became small rituals that helped me feel connected to myself. At first, everything felt unfamiliar, and I often questioned whether I would ever become fully comfortable. Like anyone adapting to a major life change, I experienced moments of uncertainty and nervousness. However, with time those feelings slowly faded as confidence replaced fear. Today, one of my favorite moments occurs almost without thinking. Whenever I walk past the bathroom mirror, I instinctively pause for a second to catch my reflection. Sometimes I smile without even realizing it. During quiet evenings, as I go through my daily routine and care for myself, I feel a deep sense of gratitude for how far my journey has brought me. In many ways, I believe those quiet moments reflect the future my mother had imagined years earlier while she was preparing for my arrival into the world. Whether or not everything unfolded exactly as she once envisioned, I know she always wanted me to live a life where I could eventually find comfort, confidence, and happiness in the person I saw looking back from the mirror. Z.